Let's kick it off. A very warm welcome from my side. My name is Felsberger. I'm Senior Advisor for Supply Chain Resilience here at Prewave, and I'm joined by Pyry Naukkarinen. He's one of our product managers for the DRN and component analysis. And what we are going to show you today is a glimpse into the Taiwan complex report we published a few weeks ago. This report, not sure how many of you have already read it or not, but this report is a very comprehensive 90-page report where we did a deep dive into the semiconductor supply chain. And today we will present to you the highlights here. Who are we? Prewave is an AI-native supply chain resilience software provider. We focus on those core verticals with over 200 customers in that area, and where we particularly try to help our customers to understand risks better, to anticipate them, to give our clients kind of a head start, and also the insights needed to build a strategic and quite functional mitigation strategy due to better understanding and early alerting of the supply chains of our customers. Why is that important? I think it will not come by any surprise at all that these days are quite volatile, and there hasn't been times like this in the past decade, I would say, in supply chain. So we see supply chain disruptions and volatility left and right wherever we are looking, and this is of course a very bad situation for us working in supply chain. But as bad as these events are and as dramatic as they are, there is also things companies can do and can prepare for. And I really like this quote from Ayrton Senna, where he said, "You cannot overtake 15 cars when it's sunny weather, but you can when it's raining." And the better companies are prepared for this kind of rain and to navigate this rainy weather we are in currently, so to speak, the better they will get out of those crises, and potentially even get ahead in regards of market share or gain any other competitive advantages here. What is it? What keeps us at our toes currently? I could do a whole webinar about the issues currently affecting supply chains, I guess. But just to give you a bit of a feeling, we have a lot of gray rhinos, so to speak, not really black swans, as I would argue, because most of these events were predictable in a sense, not really in the way that we can say, okay, for example, at this day, Iran will be attacked or the Strait of Hormuz will be closed. But if you look into supply chains in a systematic manner, you have identified years ago probably that the Strait of Hormuz, for example, is quite a maritime choke point and a leverage point for both for the Iranians and for the US, for example. And there are many such circumstances in our supply chain. Sometimes they're quite visible, like we have with the Strait of Hormuz, and in other supply chains, the bottlenecks are a bit more. How to put it? We have to look a bit deeper into the supply chain and ask a bit more of our data, for example, to uncover those bottlenecks. And this is exactly what we try to do with these strategic risk outlooks, like we did with the Taiwan complex. So the idea is that we provide you on a regular basis with deep dives into supply chains, into important supply chains for our customers and for the economy in general, and dissect it really. Look in our data, look in other available data sets, and see, okay, what are the structural issues here? What are the basic risks we have to monitor and we have to be aware of, that it doesn't hit us by surprise if something happens. And once this is done with the strategic risk outlook, that Taiwan complex, the latest one, you can do the analysis in our platform. You look at the exposure you have towards those commodities, towards those countries, and supply chains, And in the situation itself, if something happens, so ideally you are already prepared or are at least aware that, that there is a high chance that something could happen, or that if something is happening there, it's quite critical. Then we support you further with alerting, but not only alerts, but also with this contextualization. Then, if an event happened, with the situation reports, where we say, okay, now it happened, and this is what it means for you and your supply chain, and this is where to look now, because that's how the crisis will develop. Yeah, that's what we're doing. And now, without further ado, I will dive into the latest strategic risk outlook, which is called the Taiwan complex. Why did we call it the Taiwan complex? Because as soon as you start the discussion in supply chain circles about semiconductors, there's almost like a reflex. It goes to Taiwan and the Taiwan Strait and the South Chinese Sea. And all those bottlenecks. And these are, of course, important factors to monitor. But that's what we called the old view. There is so much more to the semiconductor industry, and that is what we looked at with our report here. And the real view, the real things you need to understand to mitigate risk in these supply chains is that you have, I like to say, bottlenecks all the way down, almost, because it's such a specialized industry there. And what we did is we took 21 big companies, focal companies in this industry, and looked at the terrain data, our data sets, and tried to analyze, okay, what are the dependencies of those companies and how do other companies depend on them. And based on that, we analyzed in depth a bit more than 6,000 suppliers connected to those 21 choke point companies. And what we see is like things like structural monopolies, so like where we have market shares over 90% of some companies, and we see, okay, if something happening there, you may have a real issue, and you at least need to be aware of these concentration risks and these bottlenecks for supply chain risk management. Yeah, once we analyze the data set, the thing we usually start out with is exposure analysis of a certain data set. And we took 169 European companies ranked, excuse me, ranked by market share. So the biggest European companies fell into this analysis, and we checked the exposure towards those 21 companies. And that's quite interesting here, because what you see is at tier 1 level, your exposure might not be that high. So there is a very good chance that if you're only dealing with your direct suppliers, you may not be aware of these companies in your supply chain, depending on your business model here. Yeah, but if we go a bit deeper in the supply chain to tier 2 and tier 3 level, we see how quickly these numbers grow, and it's up to almost 90% when we look in the automotive industry of exposure, and that's quite significant. And we saw that, for example, with the Nexperia case a few months ago, that if something is happening in the semiconductor industry, and you do not know it, that you're within this, that you have this supply in your supply chain, you can face really severe risks of stock out or production stops and all that stuff. So that's why it's also for us in the proactive analysis so important to uncover that and to shine a bit light of to the deeper exposure here. Yeah, what we did then, after we started with our basic analysis of our data set, we said, okay, look, it makes a lot of sense if we cluster those risks in 5 strategic buckets. These buckets, we called them also single point of failures, because every bucket has a very specific set of failure modes to it at the end. And those 5 buckets I will dive into a bit more in the next few minutes. And basically what you will see is strategic bottlenecks at the raw material level. You will see bottlenecks at the silicon wafer production level, equipment level, foundry level, and then as well at the final stage assembly at the OSAT level here as well. Yeah. Let's dive into the first bucket, the raw materials, because that's a quite interesting one, and the concentration is not only quite high within a country, like in the whole US for that sense of this high purity quartz. It's literally in the next vicinity, because this high purity quartz are produced and mined by Sibelco and the quartz company TQC are literally neighbors, because that's where the mine is and that's where the quartz raw materials are. And when you look at the map, you see here how closely they are connected, and there is essentially no alternative for those kind of materials here. You see, you need a very high purity, and literally the rest of the world producing this especially high-end semiconductors needs those input materials for their silicon ingots. When we look at the risk profiles, and that's also the interesting part which we uncovered in the report, is that every stage, every bucket basically has their own set of risks to it. While you do not have too much technology risk with the mining situation there, since they are quite close located in the same area, they were both hit, for example, by Hurricane Helene in 2024, and such a severe hurricane as back then is quite a rare event. But if it happens, of course, there is a structural monopoly or close to monopoly at the end affected, and could affect the very upstream beginning of the whole semiconductor supply chain. That's important to know, and also important to put into perspective that this is in your supply chain. If you receive an alert like the Hurricane Helene alert we shared back then in our platform, you need to put it into perspective here as well. The next bucket I would like to touch on is the silicon wafer production. Here we see that it's a quite high concentration, especially in Japan and South Korea, and then again in a few companies. It's Shin-Etsu, it's SUMCO, it's also Siltronic and SK Siltron to a lesser extent, but basically a lot of the market share in that area is handled by those four companies, Shin-Etsu and SUMCO as on the forefront, and in a few countries only. And why is that important? To put into context again the situation, that you have this knowledge. Why is that so important? When you see that that the Strait of Hormuz is closed, and we shared in our situation report that particularly Japan and South Korea is quite dependent on oil and gas from that region, and that they are at risk if this disruption takes a certain duration, that they're quite at risk to production stops, maybe because they run out of oil and gas to a certain extent, and they have to rationing in the industry, for example. That's an important information to have as early as possible here. And what we see here, again, when we look into the risk types and the events we had in our platform, you see one very dominant risk, which is tropical storms, which is quite common in this region. That's important to know. But what you also see that even particular companies have different set of risks here. And for example, this is the process of producing the silicon wafers is quite a tricky one, and also tricky in regards to safety and safety regulation and fire regulations. And we see that not that seldom, not that rarely, that there are fires in their factories as well. And that's also an information. If you think of creating business continuity plans, or ask your supplier like what to focus on in their business continuity plans, that's information you would like to have at hand, because then you can tailor-made your contingency plans, or ask for tailor-made contingency plans in that regard. So knowledge here as well is key for better preparation in that area. Speaking of the alerts I just showed you briefly here, which is by quite dominantly tropical storms in this area, in the East Asian area, where a lot of the semiconductor industry is concentrated. We also see, when we look in our data, that there are patterns to risk to a certain extent. When you want, for example, to prepare for weather events, there is a very good chance to focus on that between June and October, because this is when our platform picks up the most alerts in regards to tropical storms, for example. And that's also good to know, because if you invoke contingency plans, or if you think of creating some safety stock, maybe it's good to plan it around these patterns, these risk patterns and event patterns, because then you can be even more focused in your strategy here as well. Right. Coming to the third bucket, which is the core equipment bucket, which is a particularly interesting one, because there is basically ASML, the European company, the Dutch company, which quite dominates this industry here, especially for the high end and low nanometer chips below 7 nanometers here. And everyone, I would assume, in the industry knows about ASML and their importance. But if you look at the Terrain data and look who are the customers of those companies, you see that they're also relying on quite dominant suppliers in that regard, like Trumpf for lasers or Zeiss for optics. You see that, and that is what I meant with it's almost bottlenecks all the way down. Is there is a very specialized company relying on another very specialized company, and looking into their risk profiles of the suppliers of your suppliers here is also interesting, because we picked up quite some early indicators for financial risk in the year 2023 at Trumpf, and that's at least something you would like to know as early as possible. And maybe you cannot always mitigate that or work on that. But at the end, you can start thinking about it and finding solutions to that as well. Or ask your direct supplier, like, okay, how would you deal if this situation gets worse, and asking them how they monitor that, for example. So again, the more you know about your supply chain, the better it is, the better it is to prepare for you. Yeah. The fourth bucket we're focusing on is the fab clusters. And here, the important key message is that it's not only TSMC. Yes, TSMC is highly important in many regards for the chip industry, but actually they are organized in science parks. So you have basically different science parks where different kind of chips are produced. And the science park, and that's quite logically at the end when you follow it through, they share the same risk profiles for water shortages, power outages, or transit at the end, if logistic hubs or logistic nodes are not working anymore. So here could a single regional failure, maybe it seems to be two different sites and two different locations from TSMC, but basically you could expect, or at least need to investigate if they are in the same area. And actually they are quite often or there's a quite elevated risk for droughts and grid blackouts in this area as well. So you want to monitor that and want to be able to link a drought alert to a certain extent, a drought alert in Taiwan to potential production issues or capacity issues to a certain extent with your suppliers, in that example TSMC, because the semiconductor production process, manufacturing process is quite intense, water intense. So that's what you want to know, and maybe also want to monitor on a science park level. You do not want to look at TSMC on a group level, but maybe want also, if you know where your chips are manufactured, you also want to monitor the whole science park here. Also, when you look into other foundries like Intel, which said, okay, they go now or will focus now a lot on the AI chips, on their high-end chips here. What you also would be interested in is what is their actual exposure to China, because we know the tariffs and the export bans and restrictions from China, between China and the US, are quite intensifying or intensified over the past years. And you want to look into your customer and find out, do they have die? Can they be cut off by China or not? And here is Intel a very interesting example, and this is our public available data we're analyzing here. And you see that at tier 3 level, they have quite an exposure to China and are at risk to a certain extent when tariffs hit. They are at risk when export bans are introduced by China, that they get cut off. And this is again what you would like to investigate and prepare for when you decide to go with a certain supplier. Right. So the last big bucket I want to share with you, which is all in much more detail in the report, is the what we call the invisible OSAT gate, like the assembly and testing, which is many times outsourced into other regions. Again, in Southeast Asia, Malaysia is quite big in that. That's the one thing you would like to understand, you would like to analyze. But the other thing is what you look into ideally, and what we did in the report is, are they exposed to other bottleneck companies? And obviously we found more, but this is one I'd like to mention here. And this is Ajinomoto Fine Techno, and they produce 100% share of this ABF film resins, which you need in the chemical processes for the back-end testing and packaging. And that's interesting as well, because this is maybe a not so critical process step, the OSAT step. But if they need a particular chemical to do that, and this is only supplied by one company, which is then again maybe under a certain strain because they do not get any oil and gas anymore from Iran in the current situation, you do want to know that, and you want to be aware of that for mitigating, for proper mitigation plans. What we also looked at in the report, and this is a bit to close it off here in regards to the report, is what does it mean in disruption? How do disruption look like in regards to logistic nodes? And we looked at the shipping, at shipping logistics, because it's so much dependent on this global maritime choke point as we see now. And what we already published in the report a few weeks ago is that port disruptions are quite common. They are not as they take place quite often compared to choke point disruptions, but it's resolved quite quickly. It's like resolved in a few days. Usually, a few outliers last longer. But if a port is disrupted due to a cyber attack or due to a weather event, for example, you can expect to see it coming up again quite quickly. In the choke point situation, as we experience now, that's quite different. So we had fewer events, but the median duration for a choke point closure or capacity reduction is 240 days. And the worst even still going on, and that's the Bab el Mandab Strait, for example. So why is that important to have that also in the report, to think of mitigation strategies in regards to safety stock, for example, where I say, okay, for a port disruption, I may not need too much safety stock because it comes back quite quickly usually. But if I'm dependent on a certain choke point, I might think of increasing buffer stocks quite longer. Obviously, only feasible to a certain extent, as we see now as well. But companies, and that's what we see, who have a certain buffer stock in place, and countries especially who have buffer stock in place, are now with the Iran situation much better off, while other countries were running out of oil and gas within a few days. So that's what's also on a company level makes a difference at the end, knowing these things. So the key message to take away from the report is that to understand your supply chain and to really manage risks within your supply chain is you have to dive deeper. You have to see not only the direct exposure, you have to understand the indirect exposure in the deeper supply chain, and also the structure of the supply chain a bit more. And here again, as a reminder, that most of the exposure towards the 21 companies we analyzed and their sub-tier suppliers is on tier 2 and tier 2 to tier 4 level, with almost 80%. and there are like sectors more impacted by that, obviously, than others. Here the automotive industry as an example, with almost 90% at the deeper tier levels, and the industrial chemical industry highly exposed to hidden tiers like the Ajinomoto company I shared with you previously. What to make out of that? Yeah, that's what the report told you, and now I try to translate that. How you could use this knowledge to anticipate future disruption. And we see here the article from end of February this year that the German Handelsblatt wrote there is a new chip crisis arising or hitting the industry with full force. That was the headline here, and we would argue that based on the deep analysis in our strategic risk outlook, plus our capabilities within the platform, this is not too surprising, and you could prepare for that as well. Here I show you how this could lead to translate weak indicators, like these are alerts we catch in our platform, like the capacity retired for mature nodes. The nodes, the new chip crisis is hitting, especially here. And we see that there was a steady increase over the past month and past years, almost, in retired capacity. Like this would be alerts like Intel is retiring mature node capacity, or any other company. Yeah, so we see that increasing. That's an indicator, because if capacity is retired and decreased, that's nothing you can, if demand spikes again, you can change from one day to the other. That takes time to build again plants and then ramp them up and all that stuff. We also see that shortage alerts rose quite quickly steadily over the past year, and quite quickly over the past few months again. That's again, if we see that companies or news alerts showing shortages, and in the same time increased capacity retired, that should trigger a lot of contingency plans already, or at least to check them again and see if a company could be affected. Yeah, and here you see the cumulative major node alerts as well, so also increasing. So the data shows already that there might be an issue along the way, before the actual issue in the regards of an alert would arise. And we put that together as well, just to give you an overview. These are a snapshot of the alerts we produced within our platform regarding these new chip crises. And here we see that from January 2024 onwards, you could analyze this data and put it into perspective, which leads you at a certain point to this latest article from February 2025, from February 2026, that there is a new chip crisis in the industry. And then again, to build the bridge to the current events here, the situation in Hormuz and the de facto closure of the Strait of Hormuz will not make that situation better, because for those of you who receive already our situation reports, we flagged quite early that helium is a significant amount of helium is affected by the Iran conflict. To put numbers, to 30% of the world market share is currently offline, and you need helium for the semiconductor production. So that's the thing which will put strain on this industry again in a few weeks, especially then when they run dry of their buffer of their safety stock in the regarding companies. So that's how all of that should lead to the same idea and solution of resilience, that resilience begins upstream. Resilience begins with understanding the structure of the supply chain. And to do that, you need a whole set of things. You need the proactive part, where we, for example, point you in the direction and say, look, there could an issue arise because there are structural fragilities. But you also need the analysis over time. You see the alerts increasing, for example, and the actual alerts for the reactive part, if then, for example, an event like the US attacks on Iran happens, or a tropical storm happens at a certain area or facility, or a fire, so that you can act on it. And ideally, that's a comprehensive set of tools you have in your resilience tool set, and you apply along the way. Yeah. That's my part of the showing you a bit of the insights of the report, of the Taiwan report, and putting it into a bit more context, even more in the current situation. Yeah, I hope you like that. We will be available for Q&A at the end as well. And I truly hope you read the report and that you find value in it, and you can prepare better due to this analysis we prepared. And now, without further ado, I will hand over to Pyry, who shows you a bit in the platform what you can do and how you can follow up with such kind of analysis.
Thanks, Marco. I will indeed jump into the platform just in a second. I will just show quickly, with the help of a few slides, like what is kind of the concept, how we are bridging from the report that we were just looking into the Prewave tool, and how you can essentially leverage this context that you can get by reading the report. And one of the ways, or I would say main way, like how we are kind of materializing this report in the Prewave application, is that if you read the report, you will see there are links to various kinds of data sets related to the different sort of companies that Marco was just presenting earlier. So, for example, these different kind of segments in the semiconductor supply chain, these we have modeled in Prewave, and you will be able to then use this as kind of like a library to see, okay, what is the connection of my supply chain to these various segments of the semiconductor supply chain. And how we do that, let's say data-wise, is that we take various kinds of public data sources to construct these supply chain networks to see what companies are connected to what other companies. Of course, also your private data, in case you would have, let's say, that kind of data that you would like to play into the Prewave system, and then include in this kind of analysis. And I basically prepared here now two cases for us to look now in this webinar. And the first one of them is what Marco closed with, this like mature nodes potential semiconductor crisis, basically for the reason being partly that the semiconductor companies have redirected their investment to the more high, maybe margin and more attractive AI-related segments, and this leaving some then companies who depend on these mature nodes then potentially vulnerable. And the other one is this, let's say, science park level precision, what Marco was also stressing out, that like we should not just look at companies, but we should also look at where and in what kind of geographies these companies operate exactly, because these might affect the risk levels, and this is something that we will see when I now next show it in the Prewave platform. And yeah, indeed, I would like to start with this mature nodes case. So what we are now seeing here in the screen is like a configuration screen for a part of the Prewave tool, where you can analyze your supply chain for its exposure to something. And what I have now chosen here is that I just took a large collection of automotive OEMs just to have some relatable example. And then I wanted to see, okay, how are these companies now connected to these specific mature nodes semiconductor companies, basically the ones we have here in this collection. So we have various kind of categories for example, these different types of memories and power, semiconductors, and so on. And once we have configured our analysis, what we can then see is we get an overview of the supply chain of these companies and how they are connected to that kind of companies. These, in this case, the mature node semiconductor producers. And I think what is here quite interesting to see maybe is that in the automotive area, at least it seems when we go a few tiers deeper in the supply chain, this is really something that everybody is somehow connected to. So should these problems that we were outlining, these potential problems with the capacity of the mature nodes realize, or even if they're partly realized, but even get worse, this is then something that is essentially a big problem because this is such a deeply connected topic in the automotive industry. Just to demonstrate the capability a bit further, what we can also then do is we can dive in more detail into all of these cases to then also see, okay, uh, now, for example, in the case of General Motors, like what are then these actual mature nodes manufacturers that appear somewhere in their supply chain and what kind of categories they belong to, and even really go to this very and like a company level and see that, okay, here we have a supply chain that goes from this particular site all the way to General Motors and what has been shipped between these companies to really also get this like product level understanding of how exactly these companies depend um, on the mature nodes manufacturers in this case. The other case that I then wanted to show and demonstrate was the uh, basically this company level versus the science park level analysis. And what is possible in Prewave is we have a way to kind of plot companies in kind of a risk matrix and see how they rank on different kind of in different risk categories. And here, if we look at TSMC as a company, we can see that they have kind of like a medium risk score. Like there's nothing particularly that stands out in the risk profile of them. However, if we then look at not TSMC as a company, but if we now look at their individual locations, and then if we look at, for example, a couple of sites in this Hsinchu Science Park, what we can see here then is, for example, that the natural disasters risk here is elevated in comparison to when we look at the company as a whole. And what we can, of course, further do with this information, not just basically observe the fact that okay, they have an elevated risk, but using exactly the same tool as we were just using for this mature nodes analysis, is just by basically changing parameters of the analysis by not looking at, okay, do they have mature nodes connections in their supply chain, but are they somehow connected to the Hsinchu Science Park? We can do a similar analysis and then get a similar kind of result and see like what is the connectedness in my supply chain to that particular science park. If we have, for example, identified that there is some elevated risk in some risk category, because here we see, let's say, less connectedness because we are looking at a more precise data point. So maybe not everybody is connected to it, and also the connections are a bit deeper because now we are not looking at these IDMs, but kind of more one level deeper in the supply chain at the foundries. And yeah, I think just maybe to conclude this demo part here is like we have really categorized this semiconductor supply chain quite nicely, and we have linked all these resources in the report that we have also um, that we will circulate now also after the webinar. So you will basically be able to conduct this kind of analysis in Prewave yourself as well if you're already a user. So this is something that you can really put the, let's say, more high-level context information from the report really into use and directly relate it to your own supply chain data in the Prewave application. And with that, we are pretty much coming to the end. So uh, what we have done today is Marco has walked you through this report on like how we can understand the structural risks. We were looking at into the Prewave tool also to see how we can take the data and basically operationalize this report right away using the data sets that we have also linked to the report. And as also mentioned by Marco earlier, like then whatever kind of developments we have in this area, and there might be some related situations, we are always circulating. We're sending these situation reports to our customers that give you then like more situation specific context when some event happens. And yeah, before we go into the Q&A, I would still like to mention that in the follow-up of the webinar, you will get the link to download the report if you have not done so already. The slides will also be circulated, and then you will have also the possibility to book a demo so that you can also get your hands on the Prewave tool and do this analysis for your supplier base and learn more about your exposures to these categories and these events. And with that, I think we're now coming to the Q&A, and I think we have still some minutes for that. And I will just open the Q&A to see what we have there. Or Marco, have you already
I have
picked
it
up
already
something?
open, but there are no questions yet. So please feel free to type it in into the Q&A chat. Yeah, we will go through them as they pop up. Give a bit. We will give you a bit of time to come up with questions if there are any. Yeah, so the first question is which frequency these reports, these strategic outlooks, risk outlooks will be published. Yeah, so they will be published quarterly for the time being. So you can the next one you can expect quite soon, actually in May. The next question is, Handelsblatt warned already a year ago about a shortage. Everyone is warning, and one day they will be right. That's a good point. Actually, that's a bit the situation with risk management. So the thing you need to put into perspective is these kind of early warnings with your operations, and then at a certain point, you have to decide actually if you will put some mitigation measures to a warning and be prepared in the case that it happens. But of course, with risk, you always have the risk, I would say, that it's not materializing. And that's a thing you have to incorporate as well. That's why it's also important to look into concepts like a revenue at risk and your risk exposure, because that will give you a bit of a better feeling like what risk is worth mitigating, because mitigation is not free as well. So that's always a hard decision to make. And what risks are we fine with accepting and just reacting if it finally materializes. So that's a very valid point. We as risk managers have to take into consideration and apply our methodologies to it to come up with the best solution for that. Yeah.
Maybe I can take one from there. Are you able to share what other pre-configured libraries you have beyond semiconductor supply chain, please? we have quite an extensive coverage on different kinds of forced labor risks. Uh, that is uh, that is that is one thing, and also uh, we have uh, we have data about China uh, rare earths situation, and we are of course always happy to have a discussion and talk about it if there are any needs or any kind of questions or topics which we might not be covering currently, but uh, where there would be need to do that, because it's, let's say, the analysis is not constrained to the libraries. We can do also custom analysis quite flexibly for a wide variety of topics then on a customer by customer basis, basically.
Maybe to add to that, what you could expect is that with the strategic reports, as soon as we analyze companies, we will put together a collection or library for that, that you can use it, and we link it also, and put the Prewave IDs accordingly into the report, so that you can easily analyze your exposure. Just let me read through the remaining questions. Yeah, the first one is, do you see recycling as a viable risk reduction option? It is definitely so, and just to put that into perspective, we ourselves are no semiconductor industry experts per se. We just analyze the data and put together the results of the analysis. But what it showed in the analysis is that we're not there yet for recycling. Of course, it could be a viable option, but not in the quantities now, as we would need it to properly anticipate that. Another question: what anticipated lead time impacts do we expect to see on mature node semiconductors, and where we will start experiencing these? There are more angles to that. So when we look, for example, at the Iran situation, which we covered quite extensively in our situation reports, there we modeled an impact of the helium shortage on the semiconductor industry within the next 2 to 3 months, depending on the safety stock of the semiconductor companies in regards to helium. So there we try to model that, just to give you a rough expectation. That's never a point estimate that we say, like, look, it is this state, but what we try to establish here is to tell you, look, in a few months, in 2 to 3 months, this situation could be impacting the semiconductor industry, and then it makes everything else worse, like, because you need it for mature nodes as well. For the mature nodes themselves, I would argue it's already quite a tense situation, and based on your contractual agreements with, or your suppliers' contractual agreements with these companies, we also mentioned in the report, you could already be ranked back in regards to allocation. So that could be already a thing, depending on your contractual situation. What else? There are quite a few. Pyry, have you looked at them? Is there anyone?
Yeah, I mean, I think we maybe still have a time for a couple more. So I think there was a few related to the data that we have used for the analysis to basically construct these supply chain maps. Like, one, where do we get the information concerning the actual supply chain participants from? So everything that we have been showing today is based on publicly available information from a variety of sources. But if we look at the main categories of the data, there are one important one is certain countries in the world make customs information available on a company level. So you can basically see what companies have imported and exported what, and with which partners. So this is something that we can use to construct this kind of maps. And in addition to that, we have quite advanced methods of processing, let's say, media sources on newspapers, internet sources, for mentions of business relationships between companies. So, for example, if some company has been awarded a contract or something like this, we can extract from this sort of text uh, that these companies and then infer that they have a business relationship with each other that we can then use to enrich this kind of a map. And finally, we also work with a predictive model, so not everything is like based on some data point where we know that this is definitely the case, but we also have some probabilistic assessments where we think that this is a likely case of a supplier relationship. And I think this ties a bit into the question how to make such a report more personalized to our own portfolio, is exactly through these supply chain maps, in the sense that what we have kind of now given to you with this report is like a pointer that like these are areas in the semiconductor supply chain that are probably interesting to look at. And what we can then do is that we will help you construct your own supply chain map, basically, using these data sources that I was just mentioning. And then we can overlay these insights with your own supply chain. So then we go from this, let's say, static report into seeing how does this actually overlap with your own supply chain. So if we have a company, two customers, and they do the same analysis, given that their supplier base is not identical, then the results of this analysis would always differ, and it would be in that sense like a personalized view of the report.
So I see one question left in regards to mitigation measures for terrain, given the lack of control, and that's also a very valid point, and for sure not easy to solve. But so first thing in risk management is always understand your exposure and understand the risk profiles. Then you can start thinking about the problem at least. The most common answer probably would be safety stock, which is not always feasible or not always the best solution, of course. Where we have seen good efforts and good results in regards to risk management is if you collaborate. So first you identify which, so you prioritize your supply chain and your suppliers and terrain suppliers, like what is really critical. So you need to ideally put some number to it to understand the criticality of this part, because you have to start somewhere and you have still limited resources. And then you start collaborating either with your direct suppliers that they plan also for risk mitigation for their highest risk exposure suppliers in regards to safety stocks or contracts or such things. Qualification timelines could also be a thing to look at when you say, okay, you are now aware that you are quite dependent on a certain supplier with a very high risk profile. Then you maybe start already or urge your direct supplier to start qualifying another supplier or putting the protocols into place and such things. But these mitigation measures are at the end quite individual to look at, and also we have to take into consideration what is possible and what is feasible there. From where do you have the information about the stock level of helium at the manufacturers? So for the situation reports, we do open source research and look at analysts in that area and their data and the analysis and the analyst data, and there are some indications for stock levels here of what is usually hold. That's why I said before it's an approximation that we use just to give you a feeling about the potential timeline. Yeah, it's never 100% point estimate or 100% accurate. It should give you a level, and to ensure that this anticipation is as good as possible, we apply some statistical models like Monte Carlo simulation to weigh for different stock levels and so on and so forth. But basically from analysts at the end, from industry analysts.
I think with that, it looks like there's no more questions, at least for now. So then we would thank everybody for the questions and for the attention before that. And Marco, any other closing remarks, or shall we conclude the webinar?
We concluded. Thank you very much. And yeah, we hope that these reports are available to you, and looking forward to seeing you.